So I'm going to introduce you today to Vicki Escarra. She is the global CEO for Opportunity International. It's probably one of the largest international nonprofits and NGOs that you've never heard of. For the last 40 years, they have been making microloans across the world to attack poverty. But it would be unfair to just say they do microloans. Really, they've morphed over the years to do anything they need to do to attack the problem of poverty in their place. Vicki actually comes out of the commercial world. She spent 30 years at Delta Airlines. No, it was not her fault that your flight was delayed. She left a long time ago. But she rose to being a global CMO, Chief Marketing Officer. Has some terrific stories to tell all of you about how to survive and thrive in a corporate environment, especially as a woman. She switched over to the nonprofit world, rising now to being global CMO. In 2009, she won the prestigious Four Freedoms Award in the Freedom from Want category from the Roosevelt Institute. Please join me in welcoming Vicki Escarra. Please.
Great.
Talk a little bit first about Opportunity International and the work you and your partners do to attack poverty, because it's fascinating to watch the impact of, in some cases, a $50 or $200 or $250 loan that you're able to make.
Yeah, so Opportunity International is an organization that serves 12 million people through providing loans, savings, and insurance, but most importantly, training. And we operate in 27 countries around the world. We do our work, we have 17,000 people on the ground that are working with us. And we do our work through really focusing in on providing capital, as you said, Tom. I mean, 3 billion people in the world today live on less than $2 a day. We all know that. 70% of those are women, so women are disproportionately affected by poverty. And so the work that we do is centered around financial services, but we have a very big focus on education, on farming, on technology, on women's health, on gender issues. We're looking at energy. And so we are really moving out of just being known as a micro-lending organization to being known as a leader in innovation.
So some of the training stuff is fascinating. We'll circle back to that in a minute. But what's the kind of example? What sort of person is asking for that microloan, and what's the difference that this relatively paltry amount of money can make for that woman in that village in Uganda, for example?
Yeah, so, you know, we don't, the people that come to Opportunity do not have collateral, generally speaking. Now, they build it as they're with us over the course of their lifetime, and we've got plenty of people that now are getting $10,000 and $20,000 loans because they've built great businesses, and that's exactly what we want to see. But, you know, they classically are people, as I said, that are living on less than $2 a day. They come in, they are qualified typically through an interview with us or an interview with a group, and then they have to go through training before they get their first loan. But we offer a variety of loans and savings and other products to people. So it's pretty much people that no one else wants to serve. We do want to serve them.
So the organization started making loans, but you've quickly expanded. I mean, you own and operate banks. Why? What's the connection among all these different programs that the organization provides?
So we do own and operate 12 banks in the developing world, many in Africa, Latin America, Eastern Europe. We own a financial services company in India, which serves about 2.5 million women, and a foundation there that's really focused on providing health care for women in India. And so the focus that really moved us into owning and operating banks, which is crazy. I mean, you know, honestly, can you imagine being overseen by the Central Bank of the Congo? I mean, that's part of our work. But the reason for moving there and the reason we're moving away, I'll talk about, was to actually give people that are living in poverty a savings account. And savings is actually far more important than a loan. And so our average amount of savings for people that we serve is about $40. Doesn't mean much to us, it means a whole lot to them. So moving away now from owning and operating. So, you know, there's this great quote that one of our best investors said to me a month ago when I talked to him about our changing business model. And he said, partner when you can, own if you must. You don't need to own all these banks anymore. Take your capital and invest it in innovative products and services that will allow you to reach, well, we have a goal of 20 million jobs by 2020. We've created 13 million jobs thus far. That will impact up to 80 million people, maybe 100. And so with this new strategy around taking capital and being more innovative around education, as I've mentioned, you know, we could double that number.
I'm struck at how this ties to what Derek and Eric were just talking about, you know, the challenge that nonprofits and NGOs have to remain relevant, to change with the times. It sounds like you're being very deliberative and thoughtful about saying we started here to solve problems, but now to solve those same problems, we need to be much more engaged in training rather than owning a bank, for example.
Right. So, you know, I mean, hey, I'm speaking to the experts here. Flexibility, being resilient, you know, looking ahead, really planning. I mean, let's face it, guys, in 10 years, there will not be retail banks as we know them today. There won't be bricks and mortar. I mean, if we think we're seeing it in the United States, you should see Africa. 80% of Africans have a cell phone. They are doing everything through cell phone technology and through mobile money. And so really looking out and saying, this model is soon to be irrelevant. And what's the next mousetrap is something that I think our team has done a really good job in thinking about. We don't think about it by ourselves. We have really smart people, entrepreneurs all over the world that are helping us think about it, both clients and donors. And so, you know, there are some big trends that I see happening. Clearly, this notion of not owning but partnering is a huge trend. Impact is a huge trend in the nonprofit space. And so staying ahead of it's what we're all about.
You've mentioned a couple times, and I want to drill into this a little more, that the vast majority of your clients are women. Why and what's the impact that you're able to see on a society by focusing on them?
Yeah, so to all the guys in the audience and online, love guys, but half the world is comprised of women. And today, all the data is clear. Women are disproportionately affected by poverty, by other issues. I mean, if you look at women on boards, you look at women in the C-suite office, we've made no progress in the last 25 years, virtually none. And so the focus around, for us to really focus on women in the developing world is we know that 90 cents out of every dollar they earn goes back to their kids, back to their communities, they reinvest it. On the other hand, men, only 35% of their earnings go back into their families. And so, you know, it's a good bet to invest in women. Another thing that is painfully obvious is that, you know, when you look at eliminating half the workforce or half of the purchasers in the future, it makes absolutely no sense that you wouldn't engage in ensuring that women have a seat at every table. I am a firm believer that women involved in every solution, whether it's war, the war on terrorism, education, anything that is a big issue, if you bring women into the conversation, things do get better.
So picking up a couple questions that follow that thread that are coming straight from the audience, how do you encourage men in the developing world to not just accept, but to embrace this focus on women? You know, in many of these cultures, particularly on the government side, you know, it's a fiercely hierarchical, strongly masculine power structure, and you're coming in here with a very different focus.
Yeah, so a couple of stories. I mean, I think storytelling is really important in our work. I was just in Delhi, India, in the slums, which is where we have part of our work in India. And I was meeting with a group of women who were all in their 20s. And the leader of this group was telling the story that she had started a business of making car seat covers. And she started it 5 years ago. Her mother and father-in-law both said she could not do it. Her husband said, you cannot do this. You cannot take out a loan. You cannot work. You cannot start a business. And she did it anyhow. And now her mother and father-in-law and her husband and 7 other people are working for her. And she owns 4 businesses in Delhi. And she was in our face in that meeting saying, you know, I've got a $5,000 loan. I want more money because I can grow my business. So my answer to that question is, of course. I mean, you know, I look back over my own career, and I have had 8 mentors, 7 were men. So the reality is there are not enough women that are in positions that can really influence the world we live in. And so in the developing world and in the developed countries, we have to include men in the equation. We have to work with men. We have a lot of work that goes on in Africa in working with all the presidents across all of Africa, meeting with them, meeting with their wives. And so bringing them into the equation is a must.
So another question from the audience. There is this legacy and this reputation of Western aid, particularly Western government aid, in the developing world being wasted or misappropriated. How do you, as an NGO, deal with that? How do you address those criticisms and still focus on being effective on the ground?
Yeah, great question from the audience. So we are not an aid organization. We are an investment organization. We go about our business as capitalists, if you will. I mean, small capital, but nevertheless, we're capitalists, proudly. And I would say I personally and professionally think aid is important, but I think it is really damaging when you go in and you just flood markets with dollars as opposed to teaching people on the ground how to do things through training and education. So, you know, again, I'll focus, we've got a huge effort going on around the world on teaching smallholder farmers, which are actually now moving into commercial farming. But spending time teaching people how to open a bank account, pay back their loans, pay back their savings, really invest in a partnership with them is a model that works. And our data is clear. We do a lot of impact studies. We can clearly show that we're creating jobs. They're sustainable. People are moving out of poverty. So I'm not saying aid altogether is bad, because it isn't. I mean, if you have a huge, you know, life-altering event that involves, you know, an earthquake or whatever, aid is important. But I think we as a country have overused aid as opposed to development.
I want to dig in a little more on the training piece, because so much of training is very, very tactical. You are a farmer, we're going to back up this loan that we're making to you to provide seed capital to literally buy your seeds, and we're going to teach you a little bit about agronomy. It sounds like you're moving well beyond that, more towards aspects of running a business. Why? What along the path of the organization taught you that you needed to focus on that as well?
Focus on
the business training, you know, here's how you manage your finances, not just here's how you stick a seed in the ground and make sure it grows.
Yeah, so, I mean, the reality is, if you just, and again, lots of research done on this, if you just hand out money to people and they don't know how to invest it, and they don't know how to create businesses, which the majority of our clients are entrepreneurs, then they are likely to squander it, and they will pay it back or not pay it back. Our repayment rate's 98%, not bad. Not bad for people that are, you know, living without a lot. So it again is all about that partnership, all about, actually all about being on the ground. So we are not Americans going to India, to Indonesia, to Africa, to Latin America saying, this is how we do it. We go with people that are actually native to the countries that they're serving, and they work through it. So they're known in their communities as being leaders, supporters, partners, and that's how we do it.
Another terrific question from the audience. So
You guys are busy out there.
They are, and you know, this thing just keeps blowing up on me. How can social entrepreneurs in this group take the lessons that you've learned and apply them domestically in whatever area of expertise they're about? In other words, what are the big takeaways, the big lessons that Opportunity International has learned that can be applied whatever the context?
Yeah, so I'm asked this question a lot. I think, and I probably will not give you an answer that you like, but the reason our business model works today is because we are talking about serving the bottom of the pyramid. And we're talking about small amounts of capital, Tom. And $50 in the United States just doesn't, because the cost of living just doesn't get the same, have the same impact as it does in Rwanda or in New Delhi or in Jakarta. And so I don't have a solution. It really bothers me because I've spent my whole life trying to, both from a commercial perspective and a nonprofit perspective, try to help change things in my own country, and I still feel very drawn to trying to improve it. But the particular business model that we're working with at Opportunity does not work here. We tested it, and it didn't have the same impact. So there you go.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What strikes me, though, from talking in the break room with a couple of the entrepreneurs who are here, is they are relentlessly focused on doing whatever they need to do to solve that problem that they're trying to solve. And the path that Opportunity's taken, from starting with microloans, moving into crop insurance, other forms of insurance, savings and banking, now into training, you know, the common thread does seem to be we're trying to solve that problem, and we're going to do whatever we need to do to solve that problem.
Right. Right. So I think that's true. I mean, we were talking about being relentlessly resilient when we were out in the break room, and that would be a piece of advice that you all don't need advice from me, but if I were giving it to you, it's this notion of just, you know, be relentlessly resilient when you're going after something. And we are like that. And so our focus today is international relief. And we're relentlessly resilient in changing, shifting, moving, because it is a tough business. I mean, I'm making it sound like it's kind of a walk in the park. It's not. You know, there are lots of unusual stories when you start talking about banking and financial services in all these countries. But tough work, but I'm with that. Entrepreneurs find a way to solve problems all the time.
Actually, they are asking for your advice, because one of the things that came up was what your career trajectory has been like. I'm struck by 30 years at a Fortune 100 company, Delta Airlines, rising to having a C in front of your title. That's a big deal. Going from that world to the world of managing nonprofits, even a large nonprofit pales in comparison to Delta, for example. What skills were you able to bring with you that you found transferred immediately to the world of nonprofits?
Yeah, so I think there's a little bit of a misnomer that nonprofits are not run well. Really great nonprofits actually are run like commercial companies and private enterprises, but they have a mission and they have a heart. And so the things that I brought in to both Feeding America, I was there 6 years, and now Opportunity International, is immediately defining what a strategy of success would look like. So I always brought in a consulting company to take a look from the outside in and give advice around how do we grow? What is our growth pattern? Or, what are we doing around our people? What are we doing around our funding? And so the first thing I'd say is, be open to bringing outside consultants, help, thinking into a nonprofit. Second, you've got to get the right people on your team. It ends if you don't have the right team around you. It's a game changer to have them or not. The third thing I would say is get the right people and then manage and measure relentlessly everything you're doing. Stretch around goals, and we do, and we did. And we had 300% growth in revenue when I was at Feeding America, which was in the middle of the largest recession since the Great Depression. I mean, no one believed it, but it happened. And so, the other thing that comes to mind that really, I think, builds on that notion and reminds me of a story at Feeding America is, after you build a plan, you get the right people, you hold them accountable. You just need to be ready. So we had just done strategic planning when I was there. We got a phone call a month after we finished, and it was an anonymous call. And one of the board members said, you need to talk to these guys. They're asking a million questions around how you distribute 3 billion pounds of food, and we don't know how to answer the question. So will you talk to this group of guys? And I said, sure. So I got on the phone, and sure enough, they asked 25 or 30 questions in about 45 minutes.
And you don't know who they are?
I have no idea, and they wouldn't identify themselves. So at the end, the leader of the trio said, well, our benefactor is getting ready to sell stock, and he's interested in knowing if you have a plan for how you'd invest $100 million. I swear to God this happened. And I said,
Why, yes, we have it here in the filing cabinet. Let me just dust it off here.
So I said, we absolutely do. And he laughed. He said, okay, send me your plan, and we'll take a look at it. And I said, well, where do I send it? And so it was Kurt Kerkorian's foundation. He recently passed away, multi-billionaire. Anyhow, so we sent our plan. We were ready. And a month after that, we got a check in the mail for $20 million. A check in the mail. We had 2 people that worked in finance at the time. The woman who came, her name was Dolores, she came to me, she said, we have this $20 million check, and I think this is like one of those sweepstakes thing. I mean, is this for real? And I remember saying, does it say the Lindsay Foundation? And she said, it does. And I said, do not tear that check up. That is for real. So I called Jay Rakow, who was the head of the foundation. I'm like, why didn't you wire the money? And he said, that's the way Mr. Kerkorian does everything. And so they ended up funding $65 million to Feeding America. So be ready. That's all I'm going to say. It's worked for me. Be prepared, be flexible, be ready, because you never know when you're going to get a $100 million donor. It happens.
Did you have a plan for your career that said, I'm going to start in an entry-level job at Delta and rise to a C and then make this dramatic switch to dealing with people who want to throw $65 million at me?
No, absolutely not. I didn't. I always went for the jobs that I thought were interesting. I was very flexible about moving around a lot. I had 16 different jobs at Delta. I took on things that nobody else would take, and went into a lot of jobs. So I ran maintenance, which is, at the time, was 98% men. There were no women. I ran all the airports, ran all the call centers, and I didn't know how to do any of that. But I would say to you all, I had an idea for myself that I would always do work that I loved, and I wouldn't do things that I didn't really love. And so I set that vision for myself that I wanted to be happy in my work. And the reason I left Delta at the end, it was a couple of years after 9/11, and it wasn't fun anymore.
You tell an interesting story how you ended up transitioning from Delta to the nonprofit world. It was one of those phone calls that you answered, and maybe afterwards you thought, maybe I shouldn't have answered that one, but tell that story.
Yeah, so I had made a decision to leave, and I got a phone call from the mayor of Atlanta, who was a good friend, and she said, I've just lost my chief of staff. Would you come and help me out? It'll only be about 10 hours a week. I believed her. It ended up being 70. I know, I was like really ridiculously foolish. So I said, of course, Mayor, I'll come and help. Anyhow, so I get there, and the first day, she's on a real kick about education, and it doesn't report through the mayor. And so she said, we're going to visit every high school in the city of Atlanta. We're going to go in, we're going to talk to the seniors. Graduation was at 42% in the city of Atlanta in 2005. And she stood up and gave this talk about leadership, why it was important to graduate, get a job, go to college. And she said, and I will help you. So here's my phone number, and I will help you financially if you make an effort. So I'm like, oh my God, she's just given her cell phone to 1,000 kids. So we get in the back of her car, and she hands me her phone, and she said, now you take every one of these calls. So
funny how those things roll down.
Yeah, it kind of rolls down if you're the mayor. And I said, fine. but why are you doing this? I mean, why are you doing this? Because the kids are calling left and right. I need a letter of recommendation. I mean, these are kids that are coming from really lower income families. I need a letter of recommendation. I need $25 to apply to Georgia State or whatever, and I need help. And she helped every person. The graduation rate that year was over 90%, which is unbelievable. I mean, that's been recorded. But I said, you know, Mayor, why are you doing this? And she said, and you know, I know that you all know what this feels like. Every now and then you have a conversation with someone, and it's like the biggest conversation you've ever had in your life, and you're paying attention versus not. And she looked right at me and she said, I'm doing it because I think I can make a real difference in the world. And that doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter if you're the mayor of Atlanta, the chief marketing officer of Delta Airlines. I don't care, Vicki, but when are you going to take what I think are some decent skills and do something really good with your life? And how much money is enough money? And I was like, wow. No one's ever talked to me like that. Anyhow, so that flipped the switch. I mean, I started thinking, if I don't screw things up really badly, I can live on what I have. And I then started looking again, what do I love? Where can I make a difference? How can I find a way of really giving back? Because I feel like I've been so fortunate to live in this country. I mean, it's flip of a switch, flip of a coin, we could be in the Congo, all of us. And so that was it.
It's a fantastic story. I'm struck the common thread seems to be you can make a difference with that person there, and that person there can make a difference with the world. It's a fantastic story. Thanks for sharing it with us. We're standing between these people in lunch, so I don't want to hold them any longer.
Yeah,
but
that's
we'll get to more of these questions on the Tumblr later. Thank you again.